Some risks you can't see coming at all, but others you can predict and, yes, prepare for. Hi everyone, I'm David Scranton, and thanks for clicking on today's video. You know, it's all well and good to dream about a happy retirement, but it's up to you to make that dream come true. An important part of that is understanding that retirement brings on new risks. Today, I'm going to talk about the 7 risks to your retirement and how to prepare. I'll cover longevity, inflation, healthcare costs, spending down principal, financial reforms, relying too much on growth too late into the pre-retirement years, as well as unexpected life events. You don't need me to tell you that people are living longer today than ever before. And in a way, that's good, right? But it also presents some major challenges. For one, it means you need to prepare for a much longer retirement than your parents and grandparents. And what makes this a major risk is that many people underestimate longevity, including many financial advisors. Now, adding to the problem is another major risk that many people underestimate, and that's inflation. It's no secret that inflation eats away at the purchasing power of your money. What many people really don't realize is that inflation hits retirees much harder than the general population for a whole bunch of different reasons. And the risk gets even higher when you factor in healthcare inflation. It's a simple fact. Healthcare costs will increase as you get older. Most people realize this to some extent, but still underestimate the risk that it poses. And as a result, they make a common mistake, and that is using current healthcare prices to formulate a plan to cover future costs. Yeah, you might make some adjustments for inflation, but those adjustments end up falling short. Why? Because most folks don't realize that healthcare inflation rises at a much steeper rate than the general rate of inflation. And even if you have good insurance, it may not cover many of the things that you need or want, such as in-home health care. With inflation, if you think about it, full-time home health care that might cost almost $200,000 a year today could cost $600,000 or more per year by the time you need it. And trying to cover that out-of-pocket expense could pose another major retirement risk, and that's spending down your principal. Spending any principal in retirement today, yeah, it's a slippery slope, and in large part due to this longevity factor. So to understand this, think about a 30-year retirement as being kind of like a 30-year mortgage in reverse. When you first start making payments on a mortgage, you're really not paying very much principal, right? It's almost all interest and just a little bit of principal. But as the years go by, you find that you pay less interest each year and more principal. And this process continues until in the 30th year, you're paying almost all principal as the mortgage is about to get paid off. Now, I'd like you to think about that process in reverse, right? Take a pool of savings, let's say $1 million, generating 4% interest or $40,000 each and every year. If you take even a wee bit more than that $40,000, your $1 million in savings could be depleted within 30 years in the same way that that mortgage got paid off. I find it to be a great metaphor to explain why it's so important to address these risks and address them with a plan that follows the financial advice that you probably got from your parents, and that's live off your interest and don't touch your principal. Now, let's talk about some risks posed by 2 American institutions, Uncle Sam and Wall Street. One of the main risks of being a do-it-yourself investor, if you will, when it comes to retirement planning, is that financial laws are always changing. So understanding fully these financial rules and regulations is a key part of managing your retirement plan. And it's all about knowing how to maximize their benefits and to minimize their risks. And that same principle applies when it comes to the stock market. Counting too much on market growth is another all too common risk that many retirees make. And it's risky because, based upon the lessons of stock market history, if you have a 30-year retirement, there's a good chance at some point during that period you'll experience a long-term bear market. And if your financial strategy is overly depending on growth to engineer your income each and every year, then odds are you'll end up spending some principal down. But it gets worse. Why? Because in the years the market's down, you'll be forced to liquidate a greater number of shares to keep up with these income needs. This is a concept we talk about all the time known as reverse dollar cost averaging. And it's one of the biggest financial mistakes that a retiree can make. Now, let's look at the final risk, risk number 7. And that's unexpected life events. While yes, of course, it's impossible to anticipate every single curveball that life throws your way, some are more common than others. So here are 3 examples. First, a reduction in income from the loss of a spouse or partner. It's not pleasant to think about, but it's an important thing to prepare for. Number 2, the need for long-term care. It's more common than ever with today's longevity rates. And once again, inflation can easily cause the price of paying for long-term medical costs to increase greatly by the time you need it, and your insurance coverage to be limited. And 3, financial emergencies, those that involve elderly parents, children, and even grandchildren. These situations are often emotionally draining as well, so it's important to have a strategy that actually anticipates these to help you minimize the impact that they'd have on your finances. And we're here with Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, as well as Dr. Marc Faber, an economist, market forecaster, and editor, as well as publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report, which is available at gloomboomdoom.com. Marc, always great to have you back. Thank you.
Dr. Faber,
well, thank you very much for having me on your program.
Oh, it's great
and
to
I
see
hope you and your viewers are all well and healthy.
Great.
Very kind of you to say so. Speaking on that note, Dr. Faber, there's a lot of uncertainty building with the COVID-19 variants, Afghanistan and so forth. What is your biggest concern as far as the financial markets go right now?
Well, I think in life there are things that you can more or less control and steer, and there are outside events that about which we have no control. But I would say for retirees or about to retire people, I think there are some concerns about the future return of assets. Because as you know, say in the 1970s, the stock market capitalization of the US as a percent of the economy was throughout the 1970s less than 30%. And subsequently in the 80s and 90s, stocks went up a lot. And now we have a market capitalization to GDP of over 150%.
It's actually a lot higher than that. It's actually a lot higher than that, Dr. Faber, the market cap as a ratio to GDP. However, the last 5 years have really not been the gloom, boom, and doom scenarios we've had. The market has doubled in 5 years. And so what you're saying then is the market is at this humongous peak in values. So it's going to be harder to get a return going forward. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, it will be more difficult to make money in future. And let me add to this. In the 70s, in 1970, Treasury bonds, the 10 years Treasury bond was yielding 6%. And then the yield went up to more than 15% in 1981. And now we're down to less than 2%, so 1.5% or so, thereabouts. And in Europe, many bonds have a negative yield. So you understand, if you have a 50% portfolio, 50% equities, 50% bonds, on the bonds, you're earning very little at the present time. And so you have to rely on equities. But this is true, the indices have gone up, whereby the typical stock isn't up that much because the money has flown into a few stocks. There's a few stocks like the FANG-related stocks and semiconductors. They've been driven the market higher, but the broad market hasn't done very well. And internationally, I want to point this out because the US is not the whole world. Right. Internationally, most stock markets haven't done anything since 1998 or 2007. So they haven't gone up that much. Okay. And so the performance has been very narrow. But going forward into future, I think that foreign markets will do better than the US.
Okay, there's opportunities abroad. Let me ask you, inflation, some people are thinking it's just transitory, be back down after a year or two. What are your thoughts? You mentioned the 1970s, so I get back these visions of inflation and being in gas lines and everything else.
Well, the Federal Reserve will always tell you that it's transitory and temporary and that it won't last. But I would say, it's with inflation, sometimes it doesn't come for a long time, but when it comes, it's very difficult to put it back. It's like a toothpaste. Once it's out of the tube, to bring it back in is very tough. And I think that what will happen, and most people know that it's happened already because their standards of living have been going down. So what will happen is that inflation will accelerate on the upside, and you will see the price of insurance policies go up. You will see the price of taxes going up, and you will see that food prices will go up, and so forth and so on. So I don't think that this is temporary. And I think what will also happen, and this has also some advantages for some people, but not for corporate earnings, wages will go up. Once wages will go up, I think that corporate profits will be impacted negatively unless they increase prices, but then you get the inflation.
Then you get inflation across the board. So Dr. Faber, we need to leave it there for today. As usual, it's been great. So plan for inflation. You heard Dr. Faber, plan for inflation, and consider investing not just in the US, consider investing abroad. Again, Dr. Faber, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Now it's time to welcome our next guest, someone who knows a thing or two about helping people avoid financial mistakes, and that's income specialist Brad Williams, president of Brad Williams Financial Services, a retirement income store located in Huntsville, Alabama. Brad, thanks so much for being back with us.
Oh, great. I appreciate you calling me back.
Brad's great to see you. We're talking about retirement risks today, and certain risks today can increase under certain market conditions. What's the biggest risk, in your opinion, in today's markets?
Well, market risk right now because of normalcy bias. The market's gone up because of cheap money since 2009. And as we're starting to see hints that that's going to end, that's going to put downward pressure on the market. And this upward rise that people have gotten used to is going to change. And it's like they say, the market's going to rise until it doesn't. And that's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of people.
The markets are real pricey right now, but we know investing for income makes you better prepared for all these types of common risks, specifically market risk, correct?
Oh, it sure does, because no matter how much you have in investment or savings, the size of those accounts is not as important as what kind of income you're generating from it without cannibalizing it. And that's the key.
So what's the smartest financial move a newly retired or retired person could make today with their money? What should they do?
Well, they need to meet with someone like myself, obviously, but someone who's an income specialist to evaluate their situation, their goals, and find out what kind of income they're going to be able to generate versus what kind of income they're going to need, and then reposition those growth assets and start moving from that growth aspect that happens in the accumulation stage of life to the income stage, which happens in the distribution stage.
You know, Brad, it's interesting because we always talk about that, investing for income that helps reduce a lot of people's risks, risk of spending on principal, reduces your risk of even having your investments drop in value because income-based investments tend to be more conservative. But what are one or two other risks to people's retirement that you see? Forget about what you heard so far on the show today, but you see being things that people fall in the trap of, these maybe non-investment risks that you also need to talk about as a professional.
Well, longevity risk, because we're living longer now and your retirement's going to probably be a lot longer than your grandparents. So you need to have a sustainable plan, and investing for income helps you do that. Another thing is healthcare risk, because the things that used to kill us are not killing us now, and they're managing them. But that means we've got more expense and a longer life.
Mm. And isn't it funny how those two kind of go hand in hand, but a true income specialist needs to talk about those things, right? Not just the investments.
Exactly, because what I always tell my clients, what's important is to have a purpose-based plan and not a performance-based plan.
Yep, that's right. You know why you're investing, what your goal is. It's not just to get maximum return on your investments, because you might end up with maximum losses as an alternative. So Brad, thanks again. Great having you back here on the show.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
And now let's welcome our final guest, income specialist Jerry Slusiewicz. He's founder of Pacific Financial Planners, located in Southern California. Jerry, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave.
Jerry, it's great to see you. Tell us, what financial risks have you seen people fall prey to more than any other?
Well, I think what people underestimate, Jeff, is the effect of volatility on their retirement portfolio. And it's technically called sequence of returns, where people underestimate the risk of the stock market and they take too much risk with their portfolio on the returns. Because if the market goes down and they're drawing income in retirement, then they are compounding the negative effect on the value of their money. And so just underestimating risk is really what I think the number one people do when they get close to retirement or in retirement. That's the top mistake.
So if a consumer then relies on the market to create income, I guess on that statement, what the sequence of returns that you're referring to, the investor retiree should not rely on the long-term stock market averages to project what they can withdraw. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Jeff, because an average is exactly that. It's an average return. You know, for example, the 20 years from 2000, the beginning of the new millennium, through 2020 or the beginning of 2020, the market averaged about a 5.8% return. So you thought, if I take a 4% withdrawal rate with that average, then I'll have about a 2% growth rate on top of my money. But because of the sequence of returns, if you start losing money, let's say 2000 to 2003, we had 3 negative years in a row, you had about half your portfolio left, but your income need remains the same. So as you're drawing that income and the market started to recover, you don't recover like the market because we're not in the accumulation phase anymore. You're in the distribution phase. And that while the average might be better than your withdrawal rate, we don't live in a world of averages. We live in a world of absolute returns year by year by year, and that could cause someone to run out of money.
So if we're going to have an erosion of the principal value of somebody's savings nest egg, how do we alleviate that? Does investing for income make you better prepared for those types of risks?
Yes, Jeff. Two things on that is that investing for income, you're kind of in a company that's saying, hey, we want to share the wealth today. When you're a growth investor and hoping for the future appreciation of stocks, well, that's one method that could work when you're in the accumulation phase. When you're in the income phase and some company says, here's $100, we're going to share this with you this year and next year, and maybe even give you more than that as dividends grow, then you're kind of dealing with stronger companies that are saying, hey, look, we're doing well today, and we're going to share in that largesse with you today. And so if you switch to what's called a true income method by having companies that have either dividends or investing in things that pay interest to meet your income needs, and then your valuations stay steady or even grow a little bit to protect against inflation, it is a much better strategy for retirees to create the income that they need and get them all the way to, the end of life.
Jerry, real quick, right now with the stock market where it is, do you think the risk is above average of somebody staying growth oriented too long and falling victim to the sequence of return risk?
Yes, David, exactly. I believe that stock market, no one really knows the true valuation of the market. We're in a super low interest rate environment, okay, and have been for some time. And so valuation is kind of, we're talking about PE ratios, price to earnings ratio of the overall market. While it can be elevated at these low interest rate levels, we've got the Fed pumping in $120 billion a month to basically force interest rates to be low. At some point in time, if they taper and rates start going up, as they probably naturally should be higher than here, you're probably going to see a deflation of the market. I think we're way overvalued, David.
Gotcha. Wow. All right, Jerry. Well, I appreciate your feedback on this as usual. It's been our pleasure. Thanks for watching today's video, The 7 Risks to Your Retirement. If you enjoyed this video, click thumbs up and give us a like to make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for new content each week.